All right, hopefully everyone is doing well out there. We are going to be doing videos on the Eastern and Western Conference trade guides that are going to be on ESPN.com. The Eastern Conference comes out on Tuesday. That is January 17th, and the Western Conference comes out on Wednesday, January 18th. We're going to do 6 different videos, one for each division. We're going to start with the Atlantic Division, and if you have a chance to go on ESPN.com, it is a comprehensive trade guide. We're not just throwing out phony trades and trades that will never happen here. If any of you have read the trade guides in the past, we're actually doing something different this year. We're splitting it up into Eastern and Western Conference. It was so big, it's about 17,000 words. So we take you into every team, what to watch, a breakdown of that, an in-depth analysis, about 300 words on that. We go into the front office history, salary cap notes, draft notes, who has first, who has seconds, who has trade exceptions, what players can't be traded, the front office history, when was the last, you get to see a trend as far as what that front office has done in the past. We also take you into one trade we would like to see by each team, and that is always the biggest challenge because there are certainly not all 30 teams are going to go out there and make a trade. So that is up on ESPN.com. It will stay up until February 9th, which is the trade deadline. We will update it as things go here, but I think this year's edition is probably the best that we've put out, even with the market as far as a lack of sellers out there and more buyers out there, just not there right now. But we can still focus in on teams as far as what some of the needs are. So we are going to focus in on the certainly the Atlantic Division. I think the first team is Boston. One thing we also added in here is a trade meter. Basically on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, what we likely will see that team make a trade as far as, and then I'm going to pull down here. So we go to Boston right now. So for example, the Celtics, and we're not going to read everything, from my viewpoint, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 4. I don't think Boston has to do anything at the deadline. I think they're going to run away with the Eastern Conference based on the injuries in Brooklyn. I think if there is a minor concern, it's probably a little bit of a lack of front court depth. When you look at Robert Williams coming back from that injury, when you look at the Al Horford minutes here, we saw Boston open up a roster spot here. They've got a bunch of trade exceptions. One of them, which is at $6.9 million, is going to expire this upcoming week here. So they can go out and make a deal and not have to sacrifice a Grant Williams or a Peyton Pritchard or a Danilo Gallinari who is hurt. They can take a player into that exception here. So for me, my concern with Boston, if there is going to be a tweak to the roster, is what is out there from a front court standpoint. So the one trade I put in there, and I don't, it's unlikely that New Orleans would do it just because he's on a good contract, would a guy like Willy Hernangomez in New Orleans. They've got that trade exception. Hernangomez can go in that. Would you sacrifice a couple seconds to do that? So that's kind of the focus when we look at these teams as far as what the trade we would like to say. I'm not throwing out a hypothetical trade that you would see from another network or a news outlet here that's, that doesn't work cap-wise, doesn't work roster-wise here. Everything works within the cap. So for Boston's perspective, I think, certainly they can hold on to that roster spot, wait until after the buyout period, after the deadline, and maybe a big kind of shakes loose. But for me, that's really the only need. There's not a need to go out and get a Derek White like we saw last year at the deadline from San Antonio. This team they're the best team in the Eastern Conference. They've proved they're the best team in the Eastern Conference. I think you can make a case with Memphis and Denver that they're one of 3 top teams in the NBA, and this team should be representing the East when all things are done. So for me, Boston, a little bit of a if there is a little bit of a concern, would be maybe just another big as far as a backup insurance policy for the Celtics. I think when you look at Brooklyn, this is certainly with the Durant injury, this is kind of who you are right now. And I think if we were writing this article back in November, we would probably be talking about Durant and Irving and blowing this thing up. They're in the number 2 hole. They've lost a few games since Durant's been injured here. Hopefully he will be back. I don't think you have to make wholesale changes to this roster at all. I think they're kind of almost in a similar to position where Boston is. I think you've got to maybe a little bit more of a pressing need. You've got to address your lack of a front court here. You basically are you're 28th in defensive rebounding percentage, 21st in second chance point, 28th in second chance points per game. So you basically have Nick Claxton. You have basically T.J. Warren playing some 4, Yuta Watanabe, Markieff Morris, Day'Ron Sharpe. That's kind of your bigs as far as what you do. So my big question is, would Brooklyn sacrifice some of their shooting when you look at certainly guys like Seth Curry, Cam Thomas to get you a big? I don't think Joe Harris gets you John Collins. I don't think your first that this year that you have and the Philly first gets you John Collins. I don't think you have the assets to go out and do that. Maybe that changes, but I think just based on the year that Harris is having, this isn't pre-injury Joe Harris here. So the trade that we put in here is a player we're not looking like wholesale, right? So a guy like Jared Vanderbilt, who is in Utah, Kessler Edwards, Day'Ron Sharpe. Edwards has a 1-year bird restriction. He would have to approve it. And that Philadelphia first that you have in 2027, that's top 8 protected. That's the kind of trade that you kind of need to focus in. Not on these home run type deals, but these kind of singles deal. The concern with Vanderbilt is that can you have him, Claxton, and Ben Simmons on the court at the same time? Vanderbilt is more of a, he's a specialist, right? He's not going to go out and give you 20 points. He's not an offensive threat here. So can you have 3 non-offensive, lack of, offensive players on the court here? I didn't write about Simmons here, and you try to be as patient as you can. Now he's got the back again. Like, when you need this guy, it's like, how do you trust him? And I think that's probably something for the offseason. I don't think that's something that we're talking about the trade deadline when it comes to Ben Simmons here. But man, he is frustrating. And I know there's value from rebounding and assist, and we see sometimes defensively here. But when you need a player certainly with Durant out, now he's got this back, it's a frustrating process. And I think if things continue, then we're probably talking about Ben Simmons in the offseason here. The next team would be your New York Knicks. And I think for the Knicks, what I focused on New York is alignment. And a lot of it is alignment between Leon Rose, the president, Tom Thibodeau, their head coach. And I kind of use an example. I'm just going down to the Knicks section here. Back in Brooklyn, when I was the assistant GM, we had a situation, the 2014 trade deadline. Our luxury tax was humongous. I think we had a $90 million tax bill, which at the time was record-breaking. We had an opportunity to go get Jordan Hill, who was with the Lakers. It was basically going to cost us a future second. We had a trade exception. The deal would have added about $30 million for additional tax penalties. It would have basically been a 3-month rental. And we talked to Jason Kidd, who was the head coach at the time, and basically asked him, is he going to be part of the rotation? Is he more of an insurance policy? And Jason was like, I don't know if he's going to play. And that was enough for us here. And that's why I talk about New York, not regarding the luxury tax here. So if there's a deal out there where you have to trade and where you think it's going to improve the roster and you're going to have to move off first-round picks or a young player here, you've got to be in alignment between the front office and the head coach. And I know the Cam Reddish situation, it cost you that Charlotte first in the deal here. But we haven't seen Reddish on the court since early December. Started some games he's not part of your future here, and it costs you. And I know you basically, it's only a Charlotte first. Well, it's a draft asset, right? It costs you a draft asset on a flyer like Reddish. who is not part of your future here. So the one example I give, when we look at, I just lost New York. So if there is a deal on the table that would send, let's say, and these are all hypothetical, so do not aggregate me out there. If there's a deal out there for for Jay Crowder, and it's going to cost you Reddish, Svi Mihalik, just because of cap, and a 2022 to the Suns for Jay Crowder. Is Jay Crowder part of your rotation? We saw Tibbs kind of shorten it here. I don't think he's going to start for you. When you look at Randall and Barrett, how do you kind of take into that there? So that's the alignment part, right? So don't go out and do something that you think as a front office perspective that is not going to help the team. The other thing I mentioned here, I just added it, I'm updating things right now. What happens if Eric Gordon, you can get Eric Gordon for Fournier. I don't know what that does for Houston with that contract, because Gordon's got a non-guarantee next year, and it's going to cost you the Detroit or the Wizards first round pick. That's protected. The likelihood is that those picks probably don't turn into anything except a couple seconds here. But what happens if there's a deal on the table that you can get rid of Fournier and it's going to cost you both first? Would you go out and do that? And I think for New York, Detroit is going to be in the lottery for a long time here, and I'm not sold on where the Wizards are right now. You got the Kuzma situation, and we'll do a video on them down the road here. That will be probably video edition number 3. So for New York, if there is out there where it's going to cost you some draft assets and you're going to be able to go get a shooter, do you go out and do that? So that's where the alignment part of it, where everyone has to be on the same page here. So that is New York. For Philly, for me, really, the focus for the Sixers would be the luxury tax. You're about $1.2 million over. So my trade, I had a little fun with this with some help from my friend Steven Alvis. How about Furkan Korkmaz and a future second for Boban, right? You reunite Boban and Tobias Harris, gets you into luxury tax. You get about $16 million back. Or maybe you find a home for Jaden Springer, attach a pick and cash. You would now go under the tax, and your distribution that you would be getting back is $16 million. That is a lot of money. The team that is helping you out better make sure, because they're going to lose $1 million in tax distribution. You get some cash back in here. So that's really, for me, like, there is no home. Daryl Morey's been aggressive. He's made trades the last few years at the deadline, last 3 years, including the year in Houston. Thibault. You don't have to do anything with him. He's going to be a restricted free agent. I know he, his minutes have been all over the place. All defense last year, but you're not pressed into doing anything right now. And if you are, then he's probably your big trade asset, just based on where your draft picks are, where your seconds are. You can't trade it first until, I think the earliest is 2029. And that's if the Thunder get the one in 2025 and Brooklyn gets it in 27. So Thibault's basically your big trade asset if you're the Sixers here. So that's the focus. Thibault, that luxury tax. How do you get under? You can find that in the Philadelphia section. And then Toronto. Tim Bontemps wrote a great article about Toronto, kind of the keys to the trade deadline, or the road to the trade deadline goes through Toronto. Kind of, I don't want to put them in a situation like they were in 2021 when they were stuck in Tampa during the COVID. Everything was going on COVID. We had the future of Kyle Lowry to figure out, Norman Powell, but it's kind of similar. Although Fred VanVleet is much younger, and Gary Trent Jr., who you actually acquired for him, I think is a better player than Norman Powell. But here is a team that finished in the top 6 last year. I thought they would finish again. I like their lineup against any team in the Eastern Conference. I don't like their bench. You basically got 7 players who do the same thing here. When you look at Boucher and Thaddeus Young, they've got no really guards on the bench here. But what's going to happen is, do you hold on to Fred VanVleet after the trade deadline and sign him to a long-term deal? Not having a great year. Where is the wear and tear? I think he's second to only James Harden in the last 4 years in minutes played. has already tabled a 4-year, $114 million extension. That's the most that Toronto can offer. He's got a player option here. And, he made a good point to when he talked with Tim Bontemps in that article you can find, on ESPN.com, is that he's like, basically, he's like, without going too far into it, I'm just trying to put myself in a good position business-wise and not take an extension on a deal that was made 3 or 4 years ago. And he's right there, right? He feels like he's outplayed his contract. He's 19th among all guards in with his salary this year. But here's my question, and we see this all the time. Teams reward players for what they've done in the past and not what the future is going to be. So how do you kind of do a little bit of both here? And I would be concerned paying him $30 million north. I don't know where the wear and tear. 37 minutes the last 4 years, second only to Harden. And that's a. I mean, you see, shooting a low 33% from threes, missed 63 games. I mean, that's a major concern for me. So, do they hold on to him? Do they move him? When we do the Clippers, which will probably be part 6 of these trade guys, like I have a Clipper trade in there as far as, maybe there's a deal out there for, I had Terrence Mann, but man, I don't know if I'm in the Clippers, I would want to part way, but maybe there's a deal where the Clippers trade out, a 2029 first for guys like Amir Coffey and Covington, just to kind of get the numbers. It was originally Mann, Coffey, Covington, and a future one for Van Vliet, and then you have to re-sign him. What happens if you lose him? So a lot to take in as far as where Toronto is. I think for Trent, the Trent question is, and it says, can Toronto afford to pay its fifth best player north of $20 million? I mean, that's the reality of it. He's a good player, averaging a career high 18.3 points, right? Like he's got almost a $19 million player option here, and you've got to remember. So if you keep Van Vliet, you've got Siakam and Anunoby in 2024-25, and then Barnes the following year. I mean, like, there has to be some type of financial responsibility here, and that's going to be the big question in Toronto. So my trade for them is, hey, maybe Trent to New Orleans for Devontae Graham, Jackson Hayes in the 2027 first. Right? Like, maybe it's something like that. Less favorable of New Orleans and Milwaukee. That's kind of the direction here when you're looking at Gary Trent. So that is the Atlantic Division. There will be 5 more videos out there. You can find Central, Southeast, Southwest, Midwest, not Midwest, Northwest, and then Pacific. ESPN.com, Eastern and Western Conference trade guides will be out there Tuesday and Wednesday. Hopefully you enjoy them. It's great reading. Hopefully you guys are safe out there. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.